Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Interstellar Quest, a series in which we are trying to go interplanetary to the worlds of KSP2, but we're using KSP1. And last time we left you at Munbase Alpha, and we have our resident engineer Mirlong Kerben, who has been looking at all the equipment that we've got left there, all the sciencey stuff that we could explore and take from different parts. And maybe there is something we can do with all these wheels and rover chassis and science equipment. The science at this part of the Mun is sort of depleted, but he thinks there's something more to be done. So I sped this up 1,000%, because adding wheels is not my strongest feat. You can see me flipping and flopping things around and moving it back to the assembly part and moving it back in there and trying to create two rovers out of the bits and pieces that we had left. And one rover is going to be a more generic, simple rover that in the end my Kerbals will use very frequently on the Mun. They will prefer it over the pressurized rover. And all the other equipment that we either build using the workshop or, let's say scavenged from the laboratory, ends up in an autonomous science rover, which, it will have a very, very short lifespan. And the idea is I have this contract where I have to visit many biomes on the Mun, and I thought, well, maybe by doing something like this, I can actually automate that part. And yeah, you can see me trying to drive it off, build some more parts, adding some solar panels. Ultimately, I will set it off, fix the wheels, and it will explode in the distance as soon as it leaves the crater, which I unfortunately forgot to record for you, or I'm too embarrassed to show you. You can make up your mind. Anyway, Mirlong has a second task as this rover silently drifts off in the background despite being on a parking brake. He or she, I never know if it's a female or a male, but they start working on, should really matter that much, on adding solar panels to our Seegan D6 spacecraft. Because you remember in the last episode we came down very hard on the Mun, we crashed it, we lost the solar panels, but the craft itself seemed intact. Though people at KSP are very worried about the state of the craft, we managed to get it back upright, and looking at the fuel reserves and everything else, it should be capable of flying back. It's just very low on electricity. So what we will do is actually go in and add some new solar panels, which is exactly what Mirlong is doing. And this also tells you how great it is to actually have a workshop like Sandcastle, the mod Sandcastle, or and some other mob that brings in a workshop to build new parts somewhere else. And of course, if you go interstellar, interplanetary, it will be very helpful to have the ability to build spare parts. We are launching a rocket. This is, obviously we're launching a rocket. This is Wayfinder, the Wayfinder mission to Dres. Originally designed for Eve, but for some reason I struggle with the transfer windows and the time mechanism from KSP itself and from the Interstellar Planner. It's they don't seem to align. Anyway, there's on the way, and it's a Wayfinder, so it's got a rover. In contrast to the Scout class of vessels, and we have Scout D5 here arriving at Juna. This is the first time we actually enter orbit or even visit a different planet, and this is going to bring us a lot of science because I've been very careful with my course trajectory. So I'm in a polar orbit. I can deploy all my ScanSat sensors. We can make biomaps, we can make altimetry maps, visual maps. There's a lot of data that we can get just from this single craft in this polar orbit, which will help us find good landing sites for future crafts. And the new solar panels are more than capable of powering it. The people back at KFC are not too impressed with the repairs that Mirlong did on the Seegan D6, so we're sending up a new spacecraft. We had actually designed the E class before the F class. But since the tough time we had landing the D-class, we're skipping a generation and moving directly into the Siegen F7. And the F7 is a class that, despite being launched on a more capable vehicle, is less capable as a lander. It does bring additional Kerbals to the crew, so rather than 2 it can bring 4, but it can't bring anything in terms of cargo, which maybe we need to develop a different capability for that. But the D6 could bring cargo, but it just didn't fit in the budget. It didn't fit in the budget because this lander is not using the transfer stage to land on the moon, but it has all the capability in itself, not just to do the descent, but also to do the ascent again, and the transfer back to Kerbin, as you can see here. So we use the transfer stage for the inclination burn, but then we'll crash it somewhere safe in the Mun, and not as we previously did, either on the base itself, or on the launch landing pads itself, or on the somewhere in the vicinity of the base. On board we have Jebediah Kerman, Patney and Samlo Kerman. And of course we have Jebediah because it's an experimental craft. And Jebediah is here to show you how you do an exact precision landing. And it's using the MacJeb guidance to pinpoint the exact position of the other lander. And he's doing such a precision landing that he lands on top of it. And we have to use the reaction wheels to power them up back up and put them upright. And very fortunately we did not break the new solar panels that Mirlong had just added to them. Mirlong is so pissed off that he's not even going to pick them up. He's going to stay in the base and have them jetpack all the way over. We have also a crew rotation contract in place, which is paying for this flight. So Mirlong and Alkas Kerman will return on their freshly repaired Siegen D6. You can see them jumping on their little rover that they make to drive all the way over to the rover pickup. I believe it is Samlo that they're picking up, and themselves going into the spacecraft. And as the other two return to the base with a mission of expanding it, doing more science, but also focusing on really building out the base and doing the science contracts that the small rover failed to do. And Mirlong and Alkas have to return. It's a beautiful base with a really nice internal view. Here we are returning to the D6 and taking one last look at the moon, bringing up some additional science which will prove in very handy. Aligning a sign to the 19 degrees bearing, activating the engines which I disabled because accidentally moving into the base I've had the misfortune of launching spacecraft. However, as we get to orbit we find that we do not have enough fuel to return home, and this is a problem. We had a very inefficient ascent, and Mirlong is fortunately here to save the day. It's because we're short by only maybe 20 meters per second. And he figured, like, what can we remove? What can we take off the craft to make it lighter? And we can get rid of one of the solar panels even that he just added to it. And he was thinking about moving this payload bay, but that's just not very convenient. All the parts are floating around in lunar orbit, making a debris hazard, a Kessler effect. But it is enough. It is enough to put the periapsis of the burn into the Kerbin's atmosphere and safely return home. We do need to tap into all the reserves that we have to make it there, as you will see in a minute. But for now, enjoy the debris field that we've created, and it's probably going to impact the Mun due to gravitational imbalances in the force, in the gravity field. So in our Mun, he's aligning the sonar pellets to make sure that it doesn't crash into the debris. But our Mun has an irregular gravity field, which means that spacecraft that orbit the Mun will be pulled in there at some point in time. And so we'll just pretend that happens here as well, and then I'll go into the tracking station and delete all this stuff. Because there's no need for KSP to do all the physics calculations on my debris. they make it back home safely. Well, safely, that is to be seen, because they do enter the atmosphere in quite a steep angle. And the craft has been through a lot, being tipped over twice, crashed on the moon, lost half the components on the way back. The D6 did its job, but I'm not sure we're going to keep it around. I'm also not sure if the F7 is going to make it all the way back, because we never got around testing that. We just picked up the crew rotation contract because we really wanted to get the people home. And we had the funding to try out this new craft. So, yeah, that's why Jebediah is there. I'm sure he'll manage. We can't retract this particular solar panel, so it's going to explode while violently shaking the craft, which is also annoying. As a setting, I should probably switch off. Using the fuel tanks as a heat shield seems rather strange, but we'll pretend it was designed for this particular purpose. I'm not taking any risks with the capsule at this particular angle, and putting the heat load on the engines and the tanks is an interesting idea to improvise heat transfer. I'm not sure if this will work in real life, but it works very well in Kerbal Space Program. It will suck up most of the heat and then explode at some point, or not, as it proves to be very resilient. And then the second part will take the brunt of all the heating, and the third part, etc., etc. So that was my general thinking behind it. But we made it all the way through, so we can just decouple it. You can hear the sonic booms. We decouple the stuff. We prepare our parachutes, which have accidentally been staged, which would be bad. They would open too early and get ripped off, and that would be a bad thing. I can hear them deploy. I don't see them, but I can hear them. Me checking if we are still recording. Making our way back, and we hear the sound crackle of a thunderstorm somewhere. They made it back. Additional testing. We remember we did launch a shuttle from the St. Christopher. Well, we got engines. We got an engine upgrade. We've got these new Whiplash engines, which are incredibly loud, as you can hear. They're also incredibly powerful. So I updated the St. Christopher and did a test run. We did a test run without cargo. And I thought, wow, that's actually really, really high. Something like 36, 37 kilometers, 700 meters per second. And I wanted, wow, maybe we can launch shuttles like they did in For All Mankind, where they launched it on the back of an airplane. And so I put a 15-ton payload in the Mark II and did the test run again, which is what you're looking at right now. You have Scott Kerman and Taffield Kerman testing this new plane. And it's performing well. It's performing way better than the Mark I. And we're having a little bit of difficulty getting the payload from the payload bay. But with a 15-ton payload, it's performing not as expected, or not as hoped. Not as hoped, that's a better way to put it. There we go. Dropping the payload somewhere over the mountains in the desert area. I'm sure that's going to be fine. In the end, we made it only up to something like 300 meters per second, a little bit over Mach 1. 24 kilometers, which is still impressive. But it's nowhere near what I had expected. So we can bring 15 ton of payload about 24 kilometers up into the thinner part of the atmosphere. That could be interesting. And maybe a spacecraft with more vacuum optimized engines would be able to take it. Landing this beast, however, is really hard, because I can't reverse these engines. And even with a 4-kilometer runway, I'm really bad at timing it. So I run out of runway before I can do a final touchdown. And the wheels touch the ground, and there's the end of the runway. Fortunately, there are no colliders on these lights, and we can just continue on. Back at NovaWorks, the research facility we have over at the island, we are completing the final trials on Latitude, our next generation space crane, or our second generation space plane. That is based on the Hermes space class, or the original Hermes, as it was designed by the French back in the 1970s. And on board we have Valentina Korma, we have Nador Kerman, Alcus, Denimon, which will rotate on the Kerbal Space Station number 1 or Kerbal Spaceport. We tried a reusable booster experiment by adding parachutes to them, but you saw them clash into each other, so there's work to be done. But yeah, that's it. We were returning home, and we're also bringing an additional parachute for the Elan, this shuttle that is currently docked. And we're lining up to the docking port to make sure we're properly aligned. And we'll run into a minor problem in a minute, but I will talk about that in just a second. We're well aligned, and the station is more than capable of handling 4 additional crews, so they can stick together for maybe a couple of weeks to exchange ideas, hand over the command, the science experiment, and then make the way back to Kerbin. I've cut out that footage, obviously, so I don't need to bore you with weeks of science transfer. But here we are, nicely aligned with the docking structure, except for our tail fins. Yeah, our tail fins are the problem. But the docking port is powerful enough, as we will see once they undock. So we have the Elan, and we are transferring some crew, and once we undock the Elan, it is, of course. And it actually runs into our solar panel, which for some reason is not breaking. Maybe I managed to slow her down just enough in time and control the spacecraft properly and then gently back her out. But we need to work on the tail fins, or we need to work on the docking construct, because this is not a healthy construction. We're bringing back the Space Shuttle. And I forgot who are on board, but... let me think about that. No, I don't remember. By now it's a standard re-entry, but last time we saw a Jap crash part of the plane or losing a wing. And this is still the first generation of spacecraft. So it doesn't have the canards, it doesn't have the advanced shift of center of mass. It's less capable, but we do now know the stall speed. So we're keeping a higher speed as we fly over the space runway over it, a desert airfield, and we are lined up. We added an additional parachute which should help to break us down. That is part of the cargo that we brought up here, and we are aligned. We've got RCS to help us get there, and where I failed with my huge plane to get to the right part of the runway, I'm maintaining a higher speed and rate of descent for this spacecraft, flaring up at the final moment, launching the parachute, which will prove just enough to keep us upright, but I did lose the front wheel, which will turn out to be a pattern, as you will see in a moment. You are looking at the Eris D1. Eris, like Hermes, is the messengers of the god, but it's the messengers of Zeus. Iris was the messenger of his wife Hera. So we have this new space shuttle design, and to test its atmospheric capability, we added 2 Whiplash engines, like the same. No, these are not the Whiplash; these are different turbofans. Anyway, we added some atmospheric engines to test the system, and I very quickly found out that atmospheric autopilot does not like this plane. It hates this plane. And so I had to switch into manual controls. I had to use MagJab, Smart ASS to keep it stable at some point. And you can see me really struggling, and at some point deciding that, yeah, there's no way I'm able to land this on this tiny runway back on the island. So we are aborting that approach and making way to the main runway at the Kerbal Space Center, which is significantly longer. Which means I need to keep this plane in the air also for about 20 kilometers. And that was really difficult. The engines are pushing it down. I think the center of mass is off. These engines are not supposed to be. They're supposed to glide back, of course. This was just a test to see, will it fly, will it take off, will it land, how does the whole landing sequence work, what is the stall speed, stuff like that. And yeah, so here we are making our approach, and you can see the new runway that is in place. On board are Scott Kerman, Yukos Kerman and Lee Kerman, are new engineers and scientists that are trying out this new plane. It is designed to carry about 15 to 20 tons to low Kerbin orbit based on its transfer system. So the size of the boosters and the external tank that we will be adding. But 15 ton is a lot for the type of things that we're doing. Yes, it's not a full orange tank, but it's still a lot. And you can see me make way. I'm trying to avoid the stall speed and flaring up at the final moment, launching up the parachute. There we go, perfect. However, as you will see in a second, this plane also suffers from landing wheels problems. In this case it was not destroyed, it was just